For most of my childhood, my brother and I shared a bedroom. And for most of the time that we shared a bedroom, we had bunk beds, and which led to all sorts of fun stuff. In particular, I remember one time in which we invented what we thought was this really ingenious way to practice parachuting. Yeah. Really came up with, we had a whole system involved. We got the idea from a friend of mine who had done this off of his bunk bed and was currently in a cast. But did we consider that part? No. It was like, hey, what happened to your arm? I tried to parachute off my bunk bed and I broke it. You tried to parachute off a bunk bed? Interesting. So we thought we would try. And I remember this whole elaborate system of pillows and stuffed animals that we had on the floor. And we were sitting on the top of the bunk bed and calculating a very precise trajectory so that you didn't knock the ceiling fan. So you had to kind of go out low to stay under the ceiling fan and then go down onto the floor. We had the whole thing set up, and then we made one colossal mistake. We said, hey, Mom, watch this. We said that a lot. Most of the time, it was for things that Mom would say, do not do that. No, don't do that. Here we are, up on the bunk bed, ready to go, and we called out and asked Mom to look. Mom, look. Mom, watch. We are in prime mom watch mode at our house right now. Just the other day, we were walking down some steps at Sutton School after a program, and we had John, who just takes off at 100 miles an hour, and so he's going down this big stairwell by himself, and he was going, Mom, watch how fast I can go. And she's like, John, slow down. And then Sutton's behind her, and she's trying to walk the stairs like a princess, and she's like, Mom, watch how I do the steps. And Lauren is like just stuck in this stressful moment of two children yelling, Mom, watch all the time. We want our accomplishments to be recognized. And we want our accomplishments to be recognized by the people that mean the most to us. And although sometimes we will eventually grow out of this idea of yelling for Mom to look at everything that we do, we're kind of always yelling, look at what I can do. It's just not always at our mom. We want to be recognized. We want our accomplishments to be recognized. And we want to be recognized by those who are around us. We are in Daniel chapter 4 this morning. We're in week 4 of our series called Living with Lions, in which we're digging into, chapter by chapter, the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 4, we're going to encounter King Nebuchadnezzar having another dream. And so as we kind of recap what's happened so far, Daniel chapter 1, Jerusalem is besieged by Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar and his armies take over Jerusalem, and they pick the best and the brightest to come into Babylonian society and learn how to be Babylonian officials. In that group of best and brightest, we find our 4 heroes for the book of Daniel: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream that really bothers him, but he can't figure out what it means, and he's scared that his wise men will just give him a favorable interpretation. So he says, I'm not going to tell you what the dream was. I want you to tell me what my dream was, and then I want you to interpret it for me. Which they say, of course, we cannot do that. Nobody can do that. Daniel says, in fact, I can't do that either, but I know the God who does, and if you'll give me a little bit of time, I think we can work it out. And Daniel does. Daniel and his friends pray to God. God reveals the dream to him and helps him through that situation. The dream in particular Nebuchadnezzar had was of a large statue made of multiple kinds of materials. And outside of this statue, he sees a rock. It's called Not Cut by Human Hands, some divinely inspired rock that's taken from a mountain. It strikes the statue, and the statue falls apart and is whisked away in the wind. And this rock grows into a mountain and it consumes the whole earth. And what Nebuchadnezzar learns from this dream is that he is the head of this statue. He is the first kingdom, but there are more that are coming. And each time, one of these kingdoms will rise and they will fall. But there is a kingdom that will not fall. This is God's kingdom, God's eternal kingdom. Well, this dream and this revelation doesn't necessarily teach Nebuchadnezzar the lesson that he should. So in chapter 3, we find out that Nebuchadnezzar has built a giant statue made out of gold, and he's going to propose a loyalty test to all of his employees, that they're going to come out into the plain and they're going to bow down to his statue, and if not, they're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace. Well, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or as by this point they're known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or if you watch VeggieTales, Rack, Shack, and Benny, they refuse to bow down to the statue. They refuse to worship the image, and so they are thrown into the fire. And we learned this really big takeaway from this story, which I think is really important to reiterate. So often we think that God is going to be with us and that God is going to save us from these things. And God does save them from the fire. But the thing that God does is not what we would expect. God doesn't quench the fire, and God doesn't come and yank them out of it. God just shows up in the middle of it with them. And the thing that was supposed to hurt them doesn't so much. And this is the idea here in Daniel chapter 3, that in the midst of these flames, God is still there. So we'll go now to Daniel chapter 4 if you want to follow along. And again, we'll kind of read through the chapter and we'll break it up into pieces and we'll kind of dissect what's happening here. But before we jump into that text, there are a couple things we need to know about Daniel chapter 4 that are pretty important. First of all, you might think, this is Daniel chapter 4, and Nebuchadnezzar is going to have a dream that he doesn't know how to interpret, and Daniel's going to interpret it for him. Didn't we just do that in Daniel chapter 2? And you would be right. We did just do that in Daniel chapter 2. What is difficult to find sometimes, unless you're really smart and you're really committed, which I am neither of those things when it comes to this, and you go through and you date all of the things that happen throughout the book of Daniel, then we learn that there are about 40 to 50 years that happen in between Daniel chapter 3 and Daniel chapter 4. So yes, when we just jump into Daniel, it feels like we just did this, and shouldn't Nebuchadnezzar know better? But some time has passed, and we forget things on a day-to-day basis, much less 50 years apart. So there's a little bit of time here. The other really important thing to notice about chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar himself appears to write chapter 4. It's written from the perspective of King Nebuchadnezzar himself. In fact, here's a little Jeopardy fact for you. Daniel chapter 4 is the only chapter in our entire Bible written by a pagan, written by Nebuchadnezzar. And what we see in Daniel chapter 4 is Nebuchadnezzar's testimony of what God has done and God is doing in his life. It's pretty important if you think about it. This chapter is written almost like one of our epistles in the New Testament, as if it's meant to be distributed. You read a lot of first-person language, and in fact, Nebuchadnezzar also writes a couple of worship songs in there. Nebuchadnezzar's story in chapter 4 begins and ends with a doxology, a song of praise written by a pagan king. Fascinating. So let's dig into Daniel chapter 4, and we'll see what's happening here and what has inspired Nebuchadnezzar to write this chapter and write this letter to talk about what God has done in his life. King Nebuchadnezzar, to the nations and peoples of every language who live in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. We're about to read, if you're familiar with Daniel chapter 4, you might know what's about to happen to King Nebuchadnezzar at the end of this dream. If not, spoiler alert, it's not great. But here we read in verse 1 and 2, Nebuchadnezzar says, "It's my pleasure to write to you about what God has done in my life." We're going to read through the rest of this chapter, and you go, really? It was your pleasure? What's about to happen to you? But Nebuchadnezzar is able at this point to look back on it with some perspective and see what God did through this moment. And speaking of perspective, let's go back to the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 2 of this statue that the rock comes out and destroys. And Nebuchadnezzar learns that there is a kingdom that's not of this world, that is eternal. Kingdoms rise and fall, empires rise and fall all the time, but there's one that won't. And listen to the opening doxology in Nebuchadnezzar's chapter here. How great are his signs and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. Has Nebuchadnezzar learned this lesson? We're about to find out. Daniel chapter 4, keep going in verse 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at home in my palace, contented and prosperous. I had a dream that made me afraid. As I was lying in bed, the images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me. So I commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be brought before me to interpret the dream for me. When the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners came, I told them the dream, but they could not interpret it for me. Finally, Daniel came into my presence, and I told him the dream. He is called Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him. Nebuchadnezzar tells us that he was at home, quote, contented and prosperous. And if we're digging through the history here, we know that at this time in Nebuchadnezzar's reign, all of his other foes had been vanquished. At this particular time, there is nobody on the horizon powerful enough to come for him. So literally, he sits in his palace and there is peace in the kingdom. There's no threat, there's no worry. He is contented and prosperous, but he has a dream that worries him. Something might be happening here. There's also this hidden nugget that we're about to get to here in a second. He says that he is contented and prosperous, and that word prosperous in many other times is also translated flourishing, and it's a tree word. People use it to write about trees and how well they're doing, so store that away for the dream here in just a second. Verse 9, I said, Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too difficult for you. Here is my dream. Interpret it for me. These are the visions I saw while lying in my bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it, the wild animals found shelter, and the birds lived in its branches, and from it, every creature was fed. This time, Nebuchadnezzar's dream doesn't involve a statue, but an incredible tree. A tree situated in the very center of the world. A tree that reaches this enormous height that everybody can look from wherever they are, and they can see it. This here is signifying incredible prominence, an incredible place in the world. We almost get a tree of life vibe here, right? As in Genesis, that there's this tree in the middle and that it's providing life. It's providing fruit for all of these creatures. In the vision I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, cut down the tree and trim off its branches. Strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. This is fascinating. Nebuchadnezzar's looking at this tree in this dream, and a messenger comes. And the literal translation of that phrase that we use for messenger is one who is awake. And the implication is that even though people sleep and Nebuchadnezzar is asleep, there is one who is still seeing. There is one who is still awake, one who is seeing what's happening. And the messenger, the one who sees, the one who is still awake, comes to warn him, basically, that something is going to happen here. The messenger says, cut down the tree. This big, ginormous, impressive tree in the middle of the world that everyone can see, chop it down. Cut it out. Let the animals flee from underneath it. This tree is coming down. Verse 15, but let the stump and its roots bound with iron and bronze remain in the ground and in the grass of the field. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal until 7 times pass by for him. Let the stump be bound. That's an interesting phrase. So the stump is going to be bound with metals. And at this point in the reading, we wonder, is this punishment or is this protection? Is the tree bound in shackles, or is this some sort of preventative measure? And we'll find out in a little bit. And now we also find out, it becomes clear that this tree is representative of a person. So far, we've been talking about trees, we've been talking about botany, and here we're going to transition and say, let him have the mind of an animal. So now this is moving from tree language to person language, and this person is going to have to live in the wild and have the mind of an animal until 7 times pass by for him. There's a lot of discussion about what is meant by 7 times. To be honest, we don't know. It is a very vague phrase, and it's very vague for a reason. Because I think the most obvious and most fit example is that 7 is, of course, the Hebrew number of completion or fullness. The world, God created the earth in 7 days. And so this person is going to have the mind of an animal and live in the wilderness as long as it takes. 7 times. As long as it takes for them to get whatever lesson we're supposed to learn from this situation. Verse 17. The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on the earth and gives them to anyone he wishes and sets over them the lowliest of people. This is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. Now, Belteshazzar, tell me what it means. For none of the wise men in my kingdom can interpret it for me, but you can, because the spirit of the holy gods is in you. In these two verses, we learn the purpose of this dream, so that they would know that God is sovereign, that God is the one who places empires where they should be, that God calls them to rise and causes them to fall. God is in control and God is sovereign. And it's not this king or not this person. And as Nebuchadnezzar is about to learn, there's even a slight dig right here. As the messenger says, God causes kingdoms to rise, and he even puts the lowliest people on top of them. Meaning, even the blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then. Even the lowliest of people might find themselves in charge of a kingdom. So if you think you're that special, you're probably not, because God's in control, and even the lowliest people get a kingdom here and now and then. Keep going. Then Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, was greatly perplexed for a time, and his thoughts terrified him. So the king said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its meaning alarm you. Let's be clear. Telling the most powerful person in the world bad news is not an enviable position. It's not something that anyone wants to do, including Daniel. So he hears the dream and he goes, oh boy, I don't want to have to do this. And now Nebuchadnezzar, trusting Daniel, trusting him because this has happened before, says, don't be disturbed. Just tell me what it is. Just tell me. I brought you in here to tell me. Let's do it. Belteshazzar answered, my lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries. The tree that you saw, which grew large and strong with its top touching the sky, visible to the whole earth, with beautiful leaves and abundant fruit, providing food for all, giving shelter to wild animals, and having nesting places in its branches for the birds. Your majesty, you are that tree. You have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to distant parts of the earth. The tree we saw is representative of Nebuchadnezzar. His kingdom is incredible. The lives of so many people are in his hands, and at this time, Babylon is really the center of the world. And so Daniel says, you are that guy. You are representative of this giant tree. You hear that phrase there, you, sir, you, your majesty, are that tree. It calls us back to 2 Samuel in the story when Nathanael says that to King David, after David and Bathsheba, and after David has Uriah killed. And Nathanael says to David, there once was a king who had these sheep, but he really loved this one sheep that the poor farmer had. And so he stole that sheep from him and put it in his flock. What should be done to the guy? And David says, oh, that's terrible. You should kill the guy. Nathanael says, you're that man. You are that man. And Daniel looks at King Nebuchadnezzar and says, this tree is you. This is supposed to be this big life-changing moment that now he's going to go, oh, wait, something is going wrong here. Something is amiss. This is supposed to be the changing moment. Daniel continues, your majesty saw a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven and saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump bound with iron and bronze in the grass of the field, while its roots remain in the ground. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live with the wild animals until 7 times pass by for him. This is the interpretation, your majesty, and this is the decree the Most High has issued against the Lord the King. You will be driven away from people, and you will live with wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox and be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms of the earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules. Therefore, your majesty, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue. It's prophesied that King Nebuchadnezzar will go live with the wild animals, not like lions and tigers and bears. We hear wild animals and we think zoo stuff. And in fact, there's a lot of crazy interpretations of this, some involving near like werewolf situations. We're not talking about predatory animals. The phrase here, wild animals, is more closely related to grazing animals, field animals. In fact, we're told that he will eat grass like an ox, right? Not an animal that's going to go and be able to kill for its food, but one that's going to go graze. And that's going to be important in a minute. And now we get the answer about the stump being bound with bronze. It will be protected. It's not shackles. This is protection on the stump. It will be bound not in shackles but in preservation. This isn't the end for the tree. There could be a future for the tree after this. And finally, in verse 27, we get a peek into the reason for this whole episode. King Nebuchadnezzar's empire, it seems, is doing things that that big empires tend to do, which is when you get big and powerful, you take advantage of people that are not big and powerful. And so the messenger comes to Nebuchadnezzar and says, or Daniel says, this is not over if you repent and you take care of the oppressed instead of standing on top of them. This could all change. This doesn't have to end this way. Nebuchadnezzar has incredible wealth. He has incredible power. He can be doing incredible things to help these people. But is he? Or is he lounging on top of his empire, looking at all of the things that he created? But Daniel ends this interpretation with a ray of hope. It's not over. This doesn't have to end this way. If you change your ways, we can avoid this whole thing. Verse 28. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. I guess not. Right? There is a teaching moment, it's there and it's available, and all we have to do is change and move forward, and this doesn't have to happen, but it does happen. Everything that we just read is going to happen to King Nebuchadnezzar. Listen to the way that Stephen Miller describes Babylon in this moment in history, in his commentary on the book of Daniel. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, visited Babylon about 100 years after the height of Nebuchadnezzar, and he was still overwhelmed by its grandeur 100 years later. Over 200 years later, after King Nebuchadnezzar, Alexander the Great saw Babylon and planned to make it the headquarters of his vast empire. Babylon was a rectangularly shaped city surrounded by a broad and deep water-filled moat, and then by an intricate system of double walls. The first double wall system encompassed the main city. Its inner wall was 21 feet thick and reinforced with defense towers at 60-foot intervals, while the outer walls were 11 feet in width and also had their own watchtowers. Later, Nebuchadnezzar added another defensive double wall system. This time, the outer wall was 25 feet thick, and the inner wall was 23 feet thick. It ran east of the Euphrates at an incredible distance of 17 miles. And just to give you some perspective, the wall was wide enough at the top that 2 chariots could pass each other, going in opposite directions. 8 gates provided access to the city, the most celebrated of which was the Ishtar Gate on the north side. This was a massive double tower rising to a height of 40 feet and decorated with dragons of Marduk, the bulls of Hadad, and other impressive animals. Also, side note, the image that we use as our background for this series is a picture of a lion on the gate of Ishtar. The Ishtar Gate led one on a sacred procession toward a huge 7-level ziggurat tower. You can actually see it portrayed back up in here. A huge 7-level ziggurat tower that reached 288 feet into the air. He built a bridge about 400 feet long that spanned the entire Euphrates River and connected the east and west parts of the city. 53 temples were said to have existed within Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar had at least 3 separate palaces in Babylon, and we haven't even got to the incredible Hanging Gardens yet. Not to mention the Hanging Gardens, essentially a man-made mountain to help his wife feel less homesick. A man-made mountain covered in all the most exotic plants and trees available, with a water system that people still to this day just rave about. It pulled water from the Euphrates River and conveyed it up to the very top of the Hanging Gardens so that everything on the garden could be watered from the top down. This is just incredible stuff. According to archaeologists, almost all of the bricks taken from all of these incredible structures have Nebuchadnezzar's name stamped on them. And in fact, one such inscription read, "The fortifications of Babylon that I strengthened and established so that my name would reign forever." Daniel chapter 4, verse 29. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar 12 months later, 12 months after this interpretation. As the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, "Is this not the great Babylon that I have built as the royal residence by my majesty, my mighty power, and for the glory of my majesty?" God has given Nebuchadnezzar an entire year to think about and change his ways, but this is the straw that breaks the camel's back. As Nebuchadnezzar looks upon, undoubtedly, this incredible place, and he says, "Look at what I did. Look at what I've done for my own majesty." Even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people, and you will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on the earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. Immediately what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled, and he was driven away from people, and he ate grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle, and his nails like the claws of a bird. Again, there's a lot of speculation about what happens here with Nebuchadnezzar. Again, even some werewolf theories. But the most important and probably the most plausible explanation is this. Nebuchadnezzar was tossed out into the fields to live like an animal. Not a wild animal, not a zoo animal, but one that grazes. One that is dependent upon the provision of someone else. One that has to go graze in the field that it did not grow. That has to go eat things that it did not cause to grow, until he learned who it was that really provided for him. Nebuchadnezzar is going to learn whose kingdom this really is, and who it is that really provides for people. Finish out the chapter, and then we'll wrap it up. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. And then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All of the peoples on earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" Pride is a really intoxicating thing. When we're kids, we're constantly yelling out, "Mom, look at this. Mom, look what I can do. Mom, see this." And as we get older, we still kind of yell those things. It's just not at our mothers. "Hey, look what I did. Look what I can do." When we're adults, it just has a different meaning. When you're kids, it sounds cute. "Hey, look what I can do." When you're an adult, it just doesn't carry the same weight. And so often the things that we can do, or the things that we have done, we rarely do alone. There are people behind us. There are people in front of us. There are people showing us where to go and how to do the things that we've done. We may not be sitting up high on the walls of the greatest kingdom in the history of the world, looking over, but we too can have the temptation to look at our lives and say, "Look what I did. Look what we've done. Look what all we can do." As we reflect on Daniel chapter 4, let's not lose sight of who really does the building. Let's not lose sight of who really gives the blessings. Let's remember where they come from. And may our cries of, "Look what I can do," change into declarations of, "Look what God has done." Because God, so much so like our mothers, works behind the scenes, setting us up for our victories in life. May we credit him with what he does in our lives. Let's stand together. We'll sing one more song. If I can pray for you this morning, please come and find me as we sing together. Josh.